Okay, let's dive in. We've got these sources you brought asking us to really unpack the situation around Jimmy Fallon, specifically looking at reports, allegations about his behavior, the culture at The Tonight Show. And there's this recurring theme in the sources tying some of it to alcohol.
That's right. And it's interesting because for years, Jimmy Fallon's public image was, well, incredibly consistent, wasn't it? Always affable, enthusiastic. People often called him puppy dog nice.
Yeah, that tracks. And his whole mission seemed to be, like he said, sending people off to bed laughing and smiling.
Eh,
That was the brand.
exactly. A very clear, very positive brand.
Until September 7th, 2023. That's when Rolling Stone dropped that big expose.
Yeah.
Based on accounts from, what, 16 current and former employees.
16, yeah. And the picture they painted was starkly different. It set up this core conflict, between that public guy we all thought we knew and what employees were describing inside the show. They called it a toxic workplace.
Talked about being in a constant state of fear. Described him as erratic, volatile.
And it went beyond just, oh, this is a tough boss. The sources detail some really serious claims about the impact on staff's mental health.
Right, like heightened anxiety, nightmares.
Yeah.
Even in the most extreme cases mentioned, suicidal thoughts.
Which is incredibly serious. So, based only on the material you've given us, the big question here, the mission for this deep dive, is the one the sources kept asking. Is there just one Jimmy Fallon, the guy we see on TV, or are there maybe two?
So we're going to walk you through it. We'll look at the alleged toxic culture described in these reports, explore those persistent concerns about alcohol that keep popping up in the sources as maybe a factor, and then see how the company and Fallon himself responded, all based strictly on the sources provided.
Okay, so let's start with the allegations themselves, the alleged toxic workplace environment.
The core idea seems to be what the reports called a culture of fear. And employees even had a name for his alleged mood swings, didn't they? Good Jimmy, bad Jimmy.
Yeah, that phrase really sums it up. It speaks to this alleged unpredictability. Staff accounts suggested the whole vibe of the workday could just flip depending on his mood.
Creating that constant state of fear you mentioned, like walking on eggshells.
Exactly, trying not to trigger his irritation. One former employee was quoted saying something like, "You never knew which Jimmy we were going to get and when he was going to throw a hissy fit."
Wow. Good Jimmy, bad Jimmy.
Uh,
That makes it very real. What kind of specific behaviors did they claim created that feeling?
Well, the reports mention things like snapping over small mistakes, getting disproportionately angry about minor things, and feedback apparently could get passive-aggressive or really personal.
Personal. How so?
There was one claim where Fallon allegedly asked writers, after reviewing something, "Seriously, do you need help?" Just really cutting.
Oof. And that quote, that sums it all up. If Jimmy is in a bad mood, everyone's day is iffied. That's pretty intense.
It really speaks to the alleged power imbalance, right? How one person's mood could apparently dominate the whole environment. And this was made worse, according to the sources, by a real crisis of leadership, this constant revolving door of showrunners.
That number is just staggering. 9 showrunners in 9 years.
Yeah.
What does that immediately signal based on the reporting?
Well, it's presented as just a huge red flag for instability. Employees reportedly felt this constant churn at the top created a kind of power vacuum, and it allegedly made Fallon effectively unmanageable.
Because the showrunner is supposed to be the buffer, the manager, right? Even managing the host.
Supposedly, yes, but the claim was, in that environment, nobody told Jimmy no. Everyone, especially the showrunners, were apparently walking on eggshells around him.
So no real check on his behavior from the top.
That's the implication. And this lack of stable leadership reportedly allowed a toxic culture to really set in. And it wasn't just Fallon. The reports mention bullying allegations against other senior people, too.
Like who?
Former showrunners Jamie Granite Betterman and Nita Swice were specifically named, accused of making inappropriate comments, yelling at staff. So it sounds like it potentially permeated beyond just the host.
And HR wasn't seen as a reliable place to go.
Apparently not. There was reportedly this deep distrust. Multiple staff members claimed complaints either went nowhere or, even worse, led to retaliation.
Retaliation, seriously.
Yeah, one former employee described going to HR about a showrunner and claimed the HR rep immediately told that showrunner about the complaint. The showrunner then allegedly badmouthed the employee.
Wow. That definitely sounds like an intimidation tactic, as the source put it.
Right. You can see why someone might feel like, as one staffer said, they don't protect us.
Which brings us to the really tough part in these sources. The human toll. this alleged environment took.
Yeah.
They actually talked about designated crying rooms.
It's a really upsetting detail from the Rolling Stone report, yeah. Claims that staff would duck into guest dressing rooms just to have a place to cry and pull themselves together.
That's awful.
And the sources describe this kind of dark humor developing, where staff would reportedly joke about wanting to kill themselves, just as a way to cope with the stress, you know?
But it wasn't just jokes for everyone. It got much more serious.
Tragically, yes. 7 former employees told Rolling Stone their mental health took a massive hit because of the job. We're talking work-related nightmares, severe anxiety.
Physical symptoms, too,
Yeah.
right? Hair loss, weight loss.
Exactly. 4 said they were in therapy specifically because of what they went through there. One person claimed they had their first panic attack ever and had to go on anxiety meds while working on the show.
And the absolute worst claim reported.
Yes, and this is where it really goes beyond just a bad job. 3 former employees reportedly said they contemplated suicide because of the environment.
Oh, my God.
One was quoted saying, "Mentally, I was in the lowest place of my life. I didn't want to live anymore. I thought about taking my own life all the time." I mean, these claims suggest a profound breakdown of psychological safety.
That level of reported distress is just staggering. And it naturally makes you ask why. Which brings us back to that thread in the sources about alcohol being a potential factor in Fallon's alleged behavior.
It does keep coming up in the source material. It's presented almost as a framework some use to try and understand that reported good Jimmy, bad Jimmy dynamic. Now, Fallon himself publicly denied having a drinking problem.
Right, he did.
But these concerns about alcohol are, according to the reports, really tangled up with the workplace allegations.
And this wasn't new. The sources trace it back further.
They trace some of it back to his SNL days, yeah.
Yeah.
Mentioning him and Horatio Sanz, describing them as reportedly super-functioning alcoholics. Claims of heavy drinking, even before shows, getting into bar fights, that kind of thing.
And that reputation sort of followed him. It came up again after those public injuries he had in 2015, the finger accident, the chip tooth.
Exactly. Those incidents reportedly fueled a Page 6 story, claiming some NBC execs were worried his drinking was getting out of control. NBC defended him then, the reports say, but the whispers apparently continued.
But Fallon pushed back on that directly. In that 2017 New York Times piece, he said, what was it? "I could never do a day-to-day job if I was drinking every night."
He did say that, which, as the source material points out, stands in pretty stark contrast to what some staff members continued to allege about seeing him possibly impaired or hungover at work.
So there were specific claims about seeing him like that during the workday.
According to the employee accounts and the reports, yes. 2 different employees claim they saw him appearing drunk at work back in 2017.
Yeah.
And then, on 2 separate occasions, 2019 and 2020, 2 other employees separately claimed they smelled alcohol on his breath in an elevator during the workday.
Wow. And there was that one specific rehearsal incident they described from 2017.
Right. The claim was he sort of stumbled through the rehearsal, seemed confused about the script in front of him, acted dismissive, irritable.
And beyond just specific moments, there was a broader sense among some staff linking his mood to hangovers.
Yeah, 8 former employees reportedly felt his mood swings. That unpredictability seemed tied to whether he was hungover.
So they felt they could almost predict bad Jimmy based on that.
That's what some accounts suggest. It reportedly gave them a kind of framework, a way to brace themselves. One former staffer reportedly said that if he seemed off, we all knew how to behave afterward, which was just sort of avoid eye contact and don't make another mistake.
Which implies his alleged drinking, or the after effects, had a direct negative impact on how people felt they had to operate day to day, feeding that culture of fear.
Precisely. And the sources also touch on how his public image, the partying reputation, might have led to efforts to manage his socializing more carefully, like that incident at the Niagara bar in 2014.
Why, they got some press.
Yeah, that's one public example cited. And that kind of thing, plus the existing rep, reportedly led to trying to keep his socializing, maybe specifically the drinking part, more private.
Which leads to that report about using the Friars Club as a sort of secret spot.
Exactly. Page 6 reported, and the sources mention this, that Fallon allegedly started using the Friars Club as a hideout to drink with writers in private rooms. The idea being supposedly to keep him out of the public eye while doing it.
And there was even a rumor, denied by NBC, that the network encouraged it, saw it as a safe space.
Right. NBC denied that specific part. But the sources kind of interpret the whole alleged Friars Club situation as potentially being about managing the symptoms, managing the public perception, the potential for embarrassing incidents, rather than maybe addressing an underlying issue if there was one. Focus on brand management.
Okay, so you had these very serious allegations, the reports linking them to potential alcohol issues. But then, after the Rolling Stone piece came out, there was a really strong pushback. A counter-narrative, as the sources call it.
Absolutely. NBC, some celebrity friends, and current staff members came out swinging, basically trying to frame the allegations differently, saying they were misrepresented or old news or just, the reality of a high-pressure job.
How did NBC handle it officially?
Their statement is described in the sources as a real masterclass in corporate crisis communication.
Very careful wording.
What did they say?
It was something like, "We are incredibly proud of The Tonight Show, and providing a respectful working environment is a top priority.
Hmm.
As in any workplace, we have had employees raise issues. Those have been investigated, and action has been taken where appropriate."
Hmm.
As in any workplace, that feels strategic.
Very much so, according to the analysis. It normalizes the issues, right? Suggests it's not unique to this show. And notice, no specific mention or defense of Fallon himself. Unlike back in 2015, it's about protecting the institution, the show, the process.
But others were way more direct. Jerry Seinfeld, for instance.
Oh yeah, Seinfeld was very vocal. The Rolling Stone piece mentioned an incident during his appearance where Fallon allegedly snapped at a crew member about cue cards. Seinfeld flat out denied that account.
What did he say?
Called it an idiotic twisting of events. So stupid.
Ah.
Said he'd teased Jimmy about a mistake. They all laughed. It was not uncomfortable at all.
And the sources make the point that his perspective as a peer might be different from an employee lower down the ladder, right?
Exactly. Power dynamics matter in how you perceive things. But Seinfeld's defense was strong. And then you also had current employees talking to other outlets like People, ET.
What were they saying?
They reportedly called the Rolling Stone story fake news, a misrepresentation, painted a very different picture.
A positive one.
Yeah. One producer apparently called the show a true work family. Another staffer described Fallon as super communicative, a really, really positive guy. Mentioned how supportive he'd been during the strikes.
And this narrative probably resonated with people who'd had good interactions with him. Bolstered that puppy dog nice image.
You'd assume so. It taps right back into that long-standing public persona. And a really key part of this defense was blaming any past problems on previous managers, saying things are much better now.
Ah, the Chris Miller effect. The current showrunner.
Exactly. That's presented as a central argument in the counter-narrative. The claim is, since Chris Miller took over in March 2022, things have dramatically improved.
So current staff, speaking to People magazine, attributed the past issues to former showrunners, not Fallon.
That's what was reported, yeah. Saying the environment has changed completely, it feels like a different show. Praising Miller's leadership.
That definitely creates a neat before and after story. Explains away the negative accounts as being from a previous era.
It does. It potentially allows both narratives to exist. Yeah, maybe it was bad before, but it's good now. However, the sources throw a couple of wrenches into that neat story.
Oh, like what?
Well, first, the original Rolling Stone report actually included 2 current employees among the accusers, suggesting maybe the issues weren't entirely in the past, even with Miller there.
Okay, that complicates it.
And second, this is a really interesting detail reported by Rolling Stone. The journalists noted that NBC gave them a list of current employees who had supposedly talked positively about the show, but when the reporter contacted them,
Let me guess.
not a single one agreed to speak on the record or had positive things to say about working on The Tonight Show.
Wow. Okay. That casts the public statements from other current employees in a slightly different light. Suggests maybe it wasn't universally positive, or maybe there was some PR coordination involved.
It raises that possibility, yeah. The sources suggest the reality is probably messy, a complex mixture. Maybe things have genuinely improved for some under Miller. Maybe you have loyalists defending the show. And maybe others are still hesitant to speak out or still experiencing issues.
So we're left with these dueling narratives, as the sources put it. Erratic behavior and fear versus positive guy, work family, crying rooms, and mental health crises versus never heard of it, or that was old news. The Seinfeld incident disagreement. Toxic history versus improved present under Miller. Drunk hungover claims versus Fallon's denial. How do we even begin to square all that just based on the sources?
It's tough. And that complexity really informs how the crisis itself was managed and how Fallon made his public comeback after the report.
The response seems like it was incredibly fast. Strategic.
Very much so, according to the sources. Hours after the Rolling Stone piece dropped, Fallon and Chris Miller got on a Zoom call with the staff. That was the private apology.
What was the message there? What did he reportedly say?
The reported quotes suggest a lot of remorse. Things like, "It's embarrassing and I feel so bad. Sorry if I embarrassed you and your family and friends. I feel so bad I can't even tell you." He apparently acknowledged the showrunner turnover too and said he wanted the show to be fun and inclusive.
What stood out about that apology, according to the analysis in the sources?
Two things, really. What was in it? The remorse, the shame, regret for the atmosphere. And what was reportedly left out, no admission of specific behaviors, no mention of the alcohol allegations.
And the fact it was private was key.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Kept it out of the media grinder, avoided public dissection. And crucially, when word did leak out, it came via employees who called it pretty earnest. That
Mhm.
sounds much more authentic than some polished corporate statement would have, right? It's seen as a very smart first move in crisis control.
Okay. And then after the strike ended, the show came back. The public return. What was the strategy there?
Total avoidance, basically. That's how the sources describe it. His social media stayed silent on the whole thing. When the show came back in October 2023, zero mention of the controversy on air.
Just back to normal.
Back to his typical ebullience, as one report put it. Joking about the strike, business as usual.
And if asked about it publicly at events and stuff?
Reportedly just skillfully dodged the questions.
And this strategy of just not feeding the story, starving the narrative of oxygen.
PR experts cited in the sources called it highly effective. By addressing the staff, the aggrieved party, privately and then just ignoring it publicly, they basically avoided a drawn-out public redemption tour or debate. And it seemed to work,
Minimal long-term damage to the brand.
apparently. The sources describe it as a triumph of crisis management, leading to a rapid recovery. Ratings reportedly held up, big guests kept coming. The public controversy just didn't seem to stick in a way that hurt the show's performance.
Okay, so let's try and pull these threads together. We've got the serious allegations, the alcohol narrative running underneath, the strong defense and counter-narrative, and this very effective crisis response. What does it all tell us about that original question, the two Jimmies?
Well, the sources suggest it's probably not that simple, not just one or the other. They kind of posit that, yes, the affable public eye is real, but that it likely coexists with what former employees described as this darker, more volatile side.
A side that maybe came out under pressure.
Potentially. Enabled or made worse, perhaps, by those management issues, the revolving door of showrunners. And maybe, as the alcohol narrative in the sources suggests, linked to unaddressed personal issues.
And the claims about the toxic workplace itself. The sources seem pretty convinced about that part.
They are quite firm. They conclude that for many people over a significant period, the environment was demonstrably toxic. The details, the crying rooms, the eggshells, the severe mental health impacts, including those suicidal thoughts. They argue you can't just dismiss that as people complaining about a hard job.
And the high turnover rate is seen as objective proof of dysfunction.
Exactly. 9 showrunners in 9 years is presented as an objective indicator of deep-seated institutional dysfunction.
And where does the alcohol link fit into the final analysis in the sources?
It's presented as the explanation that many staffers themselves found most compelling for the alleged behavior. It's not proof, obviously, not a clinical diagnosis in these sources, but they argue the combination of his history, the public incidents, the alleged onset observations. It builds a coherent, if circumstantial, case that alcohol was likely a significant contributing factor to the problems described.
And this whole situation, it didn't happen in isolation, right?
Yeah.
The sources put it in context.
Yeah, they place it alongside other entertainment industry repennings, mentioning Ellen DeGeneres, James Corden, cases that challenge that old idea of the toxic genius, the belief that bad behavior is okay if the person is successful or talented.
So the industry is maybe moving towards more accountability.
Yeah.
But this case shows something else, too.
It shows perhaps a growing sophistication in managing these kinds of crises from a PR perspective. The rapid recovery here really highlights how powerful celebrity and smart crisis management can be, even when facing serious allegations.
So accountability happened in the sense that he apologized privately and leadership changed, and things reportedly got better for some current staff.
Right, those are positive outcomes noted in the sources, but
But for the former employees who spoke out, who described trauma,
the sources say the resolution for them is less clear. They forced the issue, they prompted changes, but their own healing or sense of justice might be a different story.
which leaves us with that final question about the comeback. Is it really redemption and reform? Or is it more a testament to the power of celebrity and strategic PR to weather any storm?
That's the tension the sources leave us with. It's not easily resolved.
So thinking about this deep dive, What does it reveal to you about how power, public image, and accountability really work or maybe don't work in these high-pressure, high-stakes creative worlds today? Something to definitely think about.